Hey y'all, I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in to learn how to build your audience and reach new readers on podcast. So last week on episode 127, we talked about why podcast reviews are so important to podcasters and their listeners. And this week, we're going to talk about how to leave a written review for other people's podcast. That way, you'll know how easy it is to support your favorite shows and be able to easily share with your own listeners how they can leave a review for you too. So even though we're talking about written reviews, it doesn't mean that ratings don't matter. And if you're not familiar, a podcast rating is the stars you rate the show. It's just a simple click of a button in almost all podcast apps, but a written review is honest feedback from your listeners, and it's also social proof you can share with others. So at the time of this recording, there's only two places to leave a written review, and that's Apple Podcast on your iPhone or Mac, or it's called iTunes on a Windows desktop. And if you're an Android user, you can leave a written review on Podchaser.com. And I'll talk about Podchaser in just a bit. Okay, so this is where you might want to pause and pull up your phone or computer while you're listening so you can see this in real time. So to write a review on both Apple Podcast and iTunes, you're going to pull up the podcast you want to review. You're going to scroll down past the episodes, past their trailer until you see ratings and reviews, and you'll see click or tap to rate to leave a star rating. And then below that, you're going to see the written reviews, and you'll see a spot to tap called write a review. So you click that, and then you can write your review and save and submit it so the podcaster gets to see it. Now, I recommend writing your review first in your Notes app and copy and paste it into your podcast app, into Apple Podcast, just in case something goes wonky and you have to rewrite it. Ask me how I know. And again, it doesn't have to be long. It can be a short sentence or two about what you like about the show, right? But be thoughtful. Think of new listeners and how your review might influence whether they push play on the podcast or not. Think of the host. Did you truly get value from what they shared? Let them know how you've learned something new, you were inspired, maybe you tried out some tip they shared. And feel free to mention a specific episode if you want, or a guest they had on the show that you were really moved by. Reviews are a great way to connect with podcasters also before you pitch to be their guest. And you can learn more about that on episodes 44 and episode 34, and I'll link them in the show notes. Now, you can only leave one review per show, and at the time of this recording, reviews have been taken about 48 hours to actually appear live on the podcaster's page. Now, I always recommend leaving your name at the end of your review if you're okay with it being public, even your first name, last initial. And if you are okay with public, include your username if you're active on social, like on Instagram. That way, if the host wants to, they can reach out to you with a thank you, or they can share the review on social and tag your account as well. Now, not all podcasters do this by any means, but it's one way to make it easy on them if you do. And something else to think about in Apple Podcast, if you're leaving a review there, is to look at your nickname that appears when you leave a review right beside the date where you left it. So the nickname is the name you have within your iTunes account. It's different than your Apple username, and it was set way back when you first got an iTunes account, which could be a bajillion years ago. And I laugh so hard, y'all, when I see some of these names pop up because I think people don't realize what their nicknames are and how they are public. So I went in and changed my nickname to match my Instagram username. And that way it'd be so much easier for people to find me, right? And say thanks or share it with their social media audience. You could also rename it to be your podcast name, whatever is appropriate. And you can change your nickname on desktop. You go into your iTunes account on a Windows computer or your music app on a Mac and go into your account settings and scroll down and you'll see edit your nickname. You can also see there the ratings and reviews that you've left for other people's shows. So keep that in mind in case you are an Android user, but maybe you're borrowing a family member's Apple phone or iPad or Mac computer so you can leave a written review with your name. Remember, the nickname will still show up, so be sure to check that. Now, everybody asks about Spotify. What about Spotify if I host my podcast there? And if you listen on Android and want to leave a review, you can leave a star rating, but not a written review, at least at the time of this recording. And I mentioned Podchaser.com. That's Podchaser, Podchaser.com. I think they also have an app, but I usually use it on desktop. And I used to copy and paste my reviews that I left on Apple into Podchaser. That way they'll be both places, but I've kind of slacked off on that because I don't see a lot of people talking about the reviews on Podchaser. So I just haven't taken that extra step. But Podchaser is another source to leave reviews if you're not on Apple Podcasts, you don't have an Apple phone, but you use an Android. So I don't want Android users to feel left out. I know things are changing rapidly in the podcasting world right now, so I imagine other apps will start making it easier to leave a written review for them too. And if nothing else, I always recommend leaving a thoughtful comment on social media or a reply to an email where the podcaster shares their episodes. Any feedback from their listeners is so appreciated. And they may even reply and ask if they can use it as social proof in their own content. So you know how important podcast reviews are, and you know how to leave one. Well, stay tuned because next week we're going to talk about how to find your podcast reviews and what to do with them. And then we'll talk about how and when to ask for podcast reviews, especially asking your podcast guests, because I do have a few things to mention about that. I can't wait, y'all. Thanks for tuning in today. And as always, I'll be there for you to help you build your audience and reach new readers one podcast at a time. See you then.